In July 2026, the European Union Court of Justice finalized a massive penalty of 4.1 billion euros against Google. The core legal charge rested on the claim that Google abused a dominant market position regarding its Android operating system. The court cited specific offenses, arguing that Google used pre-installation agreements and strict anti-fragmentation rules to illegally box out competition and reinforce its own search engine. The European Commission presented this legal victory to the public as a defense of fair competition and a necessary shield for everyday consumers. But we need to examine whether this ruling actually protects European consumers, or if it functions as a highly sophisticated, extractive levy against a captive foreign firm. To answer that, we have to look at the stark disconnect between the strict legal market definitions used in European courts and the actual economic reality of the smartphone industry. Standard antitrust law requires regulators to define a highly specific market boundary. You cannot legally prove a firm has dominance until you establish exactly which market they are dominating. In this case, the European Commission carefully tailored that market definition to penalize the mechanics of standard open-source platform monetization. In international policy, we apply a functional test. If a regulation is designed to look, act, and extract revenue exactly like a trade barrier, it should be evaluated as one. By deconstructing the legal logic behind this 4.1 billion euro fine, we can see exactly how European tech regulation evolved into a de facto digital tariff system. Any antitrust prosecution requires a foundational step, proving that a company possesses overwhelming market dominance. For the Android case, the European Union defined the relevant market strictly as licensable smart mobile operating systems. That specific phrasing contains a crucial, deliberate omission. It excluded Apple completely. The legal justification relied entirely on supply-side logic. Because Apple does not license iOS to third-party manufacturers, the Commission determined it does not compete in the licensable market. This ignores the demand-side reality. Consumers actively view iOS and Android devices as direct, interchangeable substitutes, and both companies spend heavily to convince users to switch. Economists recognize that relying on a high market share inside an artificially narrow submarket is a notoriously poor proxy for measuring actual market power. Google's intense competition with Apple heavily restricts Google's ability to control prices or degrade quality in any Android-specific aftermarkets. If they squeeze manufacturers or users too hard, those customers simply switch to Apple. By defining Apple out of existence, the Commission engineered a legal reality where Google held a presumptive monopoly. That definition guaranteed the path to a multi-billion euro fine. With dominance legally established, the EU targeted Google's mobile application distribution agreements, the contracts that dictate which apps manufacturers pre-install on their phones. The Commission ruled that tying the Google Play Store to the Google Search app constituted an illegal abuse of that engineered monopoly. But to understand why these contracts exist, we have to look at dynamic capabilities, the idea that a tech firm's origin dictates how its ecosystem is structured and monetized. Apple operates a model of total vertical integration. They own the hardware, the operating system, and the default apps. That end-to-end control allows them to extract revenue directly through premium hardware sales and default placements. Google entered the market with a completely different model, an open-source, free operating system distributed to numerous third-party hardware manufacturers. Because Google gives the operating system away for free, it monetizes the platform through search advertising. To guarantee conversion, they rely on contracts ensuring manufacturers pre-install their search apps. The irony here is thick. Apple earns billions annually simply by setting Google as the default search engine on Safari, a closed-system default the EU accepts as perfectly legal. Google is essentially using contracts to replicate the exact default features that Apple enjoys inherently through its vertical integration. The EU penalized Google for using the precise contractual mechanisms required to keep an open-source platform financially viable against a closed, integrated competitor. When we shift our view from the flawed legal logic to macroeconomic data, the functional outcome of European tech policy becomes clear. Historically, a tariff serves two distinct functions, selectively protecting domestic industries and generating state revenue by penalizing foreign firms. We see these exact structural features embedded throughout the EU's recent wave of tech regulations, including the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. The compliance thresholds, like the DMA's gatekeeper status, were intentionally crafted to capture major U.S. firms while explicitly excluding European equivalents. Once captured by these thresholds, the financial extraction is staggering. This chart shows the European Union's revenue streams. In 2023, the EU's baseline for traditional tariff revenue was roughly $34.2 billion. That same year, the regulatory penalties extracted specifically from major U.S. tech firms totaled over $2 billion. But look at the escalation. By 2024, regulatory fines against those same American tech firms shot up to $6.7 billion, amounting to roughly 20% of the EU's traditional tariff base. When regulatory frameworks consistently extract escalating billion-dollar sums almost exclusively from a captive group of foreign competitors, they function as undeclared digital tariffs. This brings us back to the core irony of the Android prosecution. If Google had simply operated a closed ecosystem from day one, locking down the operating system and dictating terms directly to the user, exactly like Apple, they likely would have avoided this fine entirely. Closing the ecosystem would have forced regulators to acknowledge that Google operates in a broader, highly competitive market with Apple, instantly dissolving the monopoly label. This legal precedent establishes a deeply perverse incentive structure for global technology development. By penalizing the contracts necessary to maintain open platforms, the EU's antitrust framework actively disincentivizes open-source development and pushes the entire tech industry toward closed, proprietary walled gardens. The implications stretch far beyond Android and into the realities of the modern global trade landscape. Traditional protectionism, imposing overt border taxes to shield local businesses, is heavily restricted by the World Trade Organization and global trade agreements. Domestic tech regulation has stepped into that void. It serves as a covert industrial policy, neatly packaged and sold to the public under the guise of consumer protection. When neutral-sounding regulations target specific foreign business models to create artificial space for domestic alternatives, they cease to be legitimate market interventions. The €4.1 billion Google Android fine proves the point. Weaponized domestic regulatory compliance is the modern frontier of international trade protectionism.